It's getting very messy. I suspect the real fallout of this, whatever happens to Michelle Mone and her husband, and she's currently, as I understand it, she's resigned from the Conservative Party and she's on leave of absence from the House of Lords. Whatever happens to her, this is just going to contribute to a pattern of how people view this government, I suspect, rightly or wrongly. And, people are making the point, we've heard it from Keir Starmer saying she shouldn't be in the Lords. Well, that goes all the way back to David Cameron, because there were some eyebrows raised at the time she was put in the Lords. But also, we have to remember that you can't be sacked from the House of Lords. I mean, Jeffrey Archer went to prison. He's still a member of the House of Lords. So those people are saying, well, she should resign from the Lords. She can't. I mean, she's a Lord for life.
Just going back to basics here, Joe Tanner, this was is your business. To get that interview in that way, I think the first question that leaps into your mind is, what on earth were they thinking?
Yeah, there's been a lot of comparisons to the Prince Andrew interview that he gave to Newsnight, talking about what happened with him and his friend Jeffrey Epstein, and I think there are some similarities about whether it's wise to sit and have a conversation like that with someone as good as Laura. Let's face it, but I think the thing is, I think from everything that Michelle Mone has been saying, I don't think she quite understands really where the line is, in terms of what the public opinion questions will be, what is or isn't, acceptable, and also what she's actually done. I mean, this whole issue of sending letters, threatening letters to people and all sorts of stuff that's come out. I do have a degree of sympathy with the fact that government was in chaos at the time, and that there were clearly people outreaching saying, can you help? Do you know anybody that might be able to help? I've heard some really fascinating stories about batches of PPE being opened and apparently it wasn't usable. And then by the next morning, it was actually realised that the testing was on one batch and not all of the batches. But there was panic being spread throughout parts of the NHS. So, I can see why people would get involved. And I can see the speed of things would mean that there may have been, perhaps not the best checks put in place. But this has gone on way further than that. This is about accusing other people of spreading malicious rumours. This is about denying stuff that she's now having to admit to. I don't understand how her advisors would have advised her to do it in the first place. But also, at some point, you look yourself in the mirror and think, is it really worth doing this?
There's so many questions about that. And just on the most basic point, I mean, Michelle Mone is right about this. There were many people who made an awful lot of money out of PPE, personal protective equipment contracts. Many of them, they got involved because they had contacts in government, in Whitehall and at Westminster. And there was a study which we heard about just a couple of days ago, that many of those contracts that went through what was called the VIP lane cost the public, was it 80% more than the normal run of contracts? So members of the public who think, hang on, this was profiteering at a difficult time for the country, they've got surely every right to put that argument forward. That doesn't make it illegal. It doesn't make it a criminal offence. But you can see why that charge is going to stick in the mind. And now, as you say, it just gets so much uglier. I mean, to try and throw mud at Rishi Sunak in this way.
Well, I mean, it's a basic problem for the government in the first place, because they're the ones who set up the VIP lane, which, by definition, the very important people were their friends and contacts, some of whom exploited it and some of whom allegedly and are now being investigated for abusing it, either overcharging or providing substandard equipment. And that is the reality. And at one level, Michelle Mone saying, well, everyone else was doing it, so why are people pointing the finger at me? Does seem that she and her husband, Doug Borrowman, were perhaps potentially some of the worst offenders in terms of quantity of money. I mean, she's been saying she's playing the victim, and she's saying that she's under a great deal of stress and mental strain. And frankly, I think that's evident in the way she's behaved this week, in terms of thinking that saying, oh, well, it's not a crime to lie to the press would be something that everyone would accept. When, of course, she wasn't just lying to the press, she was lying to everybody. Then doubling back on that and saying that the government, her friends in the Conservative Party, knew all along about her involvement. Well, Lord Bethell, who was health minister during that period, has just tweeted messages from her saying this is typical, and at no point in that message does she declare any interest. So he didn't know, although it's an interesting subtext that he's one of those people who lost his phone, but now seems to have managed to retrieve these messages from
But
Michelle.
he goes further. He actually uses the phrase, she wasn't honest.
Yeah.
He actually says she wasn't honest about her financial interest to me. And that's that's a very specific point to be making.
So it's getting very messy. I suspect the real fallout of this, whatever happens to Michelle Mone and her husband, and she's currently, as I understand it, she's resigned from the Conservative Party and she's on leave of absence from the House of Lords. Whatever happens to her, this is just going to contribute to a pattern of how people view this government, I suspect, rightly or wrongly. And, people are making the point, we've heard it from Keir Starmer saying she shouldn't be in the Lords. Well, that goes all the way back to David Cameron, because there were some eyebrows raised at the time she was put in the Lords. But also, we have to remember that you can't be sacked from the House of Lords. I mean, Jeffrey Archer went to prison. He's still a member of the House of Lords.
Yeah.
So those people are saying, well, she should resign from the Lords. She can't. I mean, she's a Lord for life. That's why it's called a life peerage.
I think if you're jailed for a year, it's possible to be
They just changed the rules a bit.
You can be removed now from the House of Lords. It's possible to be suspended from the House of Lords, and you can do what she has done, which is to kind of recuse herself, if that's the right
leave of absence
expression on this occasion. Our listener, Maz, he's agreeing with everything you're saying. He says, I fail to understand why Michelle Mone can't see lying to the press is what it is. By doing that, she's lied to every one of us, MPs, fellow members of the Lords. Not acceptable. Now she's smearing, rightly or wrongly, the PM. Sorry, this just shows what sort of person she is. I certainly don't think the sort of person the country needs as a legislator. Here's another one. If Michelle Mone, thank you for this, if Michelle Mone wants to repair her reputation, she should start by giving the money back. She hasn't looked like doing it so far. She should be stripped of her peerage once found guilty of profiteering out of the misery of others. That's James in Hearts.
Well, that, of course, is interesting, this giving the money back question, because one of the allegations she's made is that her husband has made this, saying that basically someone said to him, if you pay back more money, then this criminal investigation will be dropped, which would be straightforward corruption. So he's now lined up an unnamed person in the government, civil servant or minister on that. But I do think there's one interesting thing about this line about, I lied to the press and it's not a crime. I mean, you and I, John, have got to face up to the fact that the standing of the media is such now with the general public that some people will think, fair enough, I wanted to protect my family, so I lied to the press. We found it outrageous, so do some of our listeners, but there's a little bit of kind of Trumpian advice in there that people don't like the press anymore, and you can get away with it in a way that perhaps you couldn't have done some time ago.
Well, I think you've got a point, hasn't he, Joe, about the standing of the press being low. I mean, it's never been terribly high, but it's especially low. You can argue now. But of course, it all depends on who's saying it, who's doing it. And if someone's saying, I lied to the press to protect my family, that might cut ice with a lot of people, given the way what they understand about the way people can be and are harassed by the media in different circumstances. If you are Michelle Mone, in this spot, maybe less sympathy, I'm guessing, is going to come your way.
But that role, I mean, the House of Lords is an important chamber. It performs an important role in our democracy and how we pass laws in this country. And, you take an oath when you go in there. There is an element of if she's forgotten the seriousness of the role and the standing that she has, there is you're paid out of the taxpayers' money when you turn up. You are given immense privilege, discounts, subsidised stuff in the House of Lords. There is a benefit. You do owe some, a degree. There is a degree, standards in public life. I think that's
I think
out the bit about lying to the press. Standards in public life.
There have been a number of people been put in the Lords who've just regarded it as yet another very rich person's accessory, that you get a seat in the House of Lords along with everything else. Incidentally, I see that the campaign group Led for Donkeys have tracked down, they put a video up on social media, they've tracked down the Mone's yacht to Barcelona, and where it would normally have the name of the yacht, they've now put up in big letters, pandemic profiteer.